All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Arik Berkovsky, and I manage the Russia and Eurasia Program at Fletcher. I'm honored to welcome you to this panel discussion on the economic and business repercussions of the war in Ukraine. This event is part of a series of conversations about the war in Ukraine that we have organized in collaboration with the Fletcher and Harvard alumni clubs in Ukraine. And all of the speakers are Fletcher and Harvard alumni. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists and our moderator. Unfortunately, Maria Kravkova could not join us today. She's feeling sick, but we're pleased to be joined by three panelists, Captain Oleh Khalayim, Andrei Pipavarsky, and Nuru Lama, who will join us shortly. And our moderator and chair for the discussion today is Professor Daniel Drezner. Captain Oleh Khalayim is an officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. He enlisted at the beginning of the war as a reservist, and he's on unpaid leave from the World Bank, where he has served as an economist since 2005. And he is vice president of the Harvard Club of Ukraine. Andrei Pipavarsky is managing director of WOG Holding, BV, and he graduated from the Fletcher School. And from 2014 to 2016, he served as Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. Nuru Lama is a Harvard College and Harvard Kennedy School alumnus. He is currently working at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, as Chief Investment Officer, where he focuses on the power sector. And finally, our moderator is Professor Daniel Drezner. He is professor of international politics at Fletcher. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and contributing writer, editor at the Washington Post. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrei Pipavarsky to discuss the damage to the Ukrainian economy from the war and the current business landscape in Ukraine. Andrei, the floor is yours.
Arik, thank you very much. I'm not in the uniform just like Oleg, but I'm fighting my own war. We are currently the largest supplier of fuel to Ukraine, and supplying fuel to Ukraine is not an easy task right now. Logistics in Ukraine is not an easy. It's more a piece of art than science in Ukraine right now, because we cannot store product anywhere because the Russians bomb our depots. So, but we need to make sure that the army has enough fuel to fight. The National Railway Company has enough fuel to bring people from the east to the west and just support the national economy. And we need to make sure that our customers have petrol at our petrol stations all the time. So far, we haven't had, over the past 3 months, we haven't had a single day when we did not have fuel at our petrol stations, and we haven't yet. Thanks God, we haven't had that day. What it means to do business at the time of the war? Everything's changed suddenly. In terms of management, human resources, financial resources, logistical networks, everything suddenly changed. Like for our company supplied quite a bit of product from Belarus, Russia, from the Black Sea ports, and suddenly everything stopped. The Belarusians and Russians reneged on the signed contracts, on prepayments, the ports got blocked. You have to find supply from alternative resources. And we supplied, as a nation, we supplied less than 10% of what we needed for the whole country from Western Europe. The rest came from the Black Sea ports, from local production from Russia and Belarus. and from Lithuania, but through Belarus. So suddenly 90% of your supply is gone. And over a 2-day period, most of your drivers tell you that they are conscripting and they're going to war. They are going to fight. And suddenly a lot of your younger male employees, and we have more than 7,000 people working for us. Suddenly, most of them tell you that they are going as volunteers to war. So you have to find people, you have to find drivers, because suddenly you can only bring your product from Western Ukraine by trucks, because the railway networks are not well developed. Even though we have lots of networks with Europe, you need to find cars, drivers, etc. And suddenly you lose retail outlets because of the Russian occupation, or because the Russian missile hits a selling unit, and then around 3 weeks into the war, the Russians started bombing our depots. So suddenly you cannot store your product. Your product has to move all the time. And you need to buy foreign currency to buy the product, because we can only buy product with euros and dollars. And we have a slight devaluation, and the National Bank imposes certain sanctions. But those are my problems. A lot of the businesses in Ukraine just closed down, especially smaller and medium size. We kept functioning. We are a big network, critically important, so we kept functioning. We had to find our way around how to do that. We couldn't stop. And we couldn't just move to the west of Ukraine, or to Poland, or to Romania, move our personnel, or close down production, because we're of critical importance. We couldn't do that. We had to adapt. And I will say that prior to the war, the whole nation was supplying around 1,000 to 1,500 tons of fuel products from Western Europe per day. Now we're supplying 15,000 tons per day. That's a tenfold increase. And once we get to around 22, 25,000 tons per day, we will be all, I would say that my mission is complete, and we're all set. We need some more time to get there, maybe a month or two, and we'll get there. So we'll establish new ways, new channels of supply of diesel and petrol to Ukraine. But once again, we are lucky once, because we are of critical importance. We are scattered all over the country. If you look at the companies, at the businesses that used to produce something, it doesn't matter what, construction materials, auto parts, whatever. Most of the logistic networks, links collapsed. They cannot buy foreign products because they cannot buy currency to pay for those foreign products. We can. A lot of people, human resources, have left the country or have moved to the west. So eastern part and southern part of the country, in terms of business and activity and production activity, pretty much disappeared. There's pretty much no production going on or business activity going on in the east of Ukraine or south of Ukraine because of the war. Some parts of south, the east still occupied. Some have been shelled significantly, and a lot of Ukrainian businessmen and foreign businesses don't take the risk operating there. So we lost a significant chunk of the economy, and we lost a significant chunk of foreign currency revenue, because we cannot export agricultural production. We can barely export iron ore and metals. So we got hit on two fronts. The production got shut down. People are losing jobs, and we've lost a significant source of revenue, foreign currency revenue, for our country. Thanks God, the international community is supporting us quite a bit, so we can cover our budget deficit and fiscal deficit with the foreign currency inflows from multinational institutions and foreign countries, essentially, that support us. But in terms of the business activity, we are suffering quite a bit. What it means for our economy, we are at this point screwed. That's pretty much the answer. The longer the war continues, the more devastating the economic impact will be on Ukraine. Quite few people are leaving the country. There is no new investment. Yes, the agricultural producers have completed the sowing season in the springtime, but in the summertime, they will have difficulty exporting the new crop because it's virtually impossible to export all produced agricultural crop through the existing logistical networks through Western Europe. It's just physically impossible, which will have a significant impact globally, not only on agricultural commodity prices, but just globally. In terms of business environment, we tried not to lay off people at all. We're trying to support our people. Quite few of our colleagues from the same sector are not laying off people, even though we don't need 7,000 people right now. We keep supporting our personnel. And we will keep supporting for as long as we can. And as long as our army can support us in the east and in the south, we'll support our people and we'll support the army. We continue paying taxes despite the lack of working capital. And most of the large businessmen and CEOs that I know continue to pay taxes, even though we have a moratorium on paying taxes. We don't have to until the end of the war, but we continue doing that. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of our suppliers. We not only sell fuel, we also function as a cafeteria and as a shop, a small convenience shop. We lost a lot of our suppliers to the convenience shop because they just don't exist anymore. I would say more than 50% of our assortment is gone. And we try to work with local producers. Quite few of them are gone. They just don't exist anymore. They either don't produce, or they've left the country, or they stopped the production. We do not switch to foreign produced products. They are pretty much not important. There's pretty much no import, so we just had to reduce our assortment and offer less to our clients. That's pretty much the way it is. If you have any questions, Eric, I will be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Andrei. And that was an excellent overview. And I do have many questions, but we'll have time after everyone has made opening remarks. Oleh, do you have anything to add to what Andrei said about Ukraine's business and economic landscape, right? Oleh?
Hello, do you hear me?
Now we do, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. And have a sense of normalcy that I'm reminiscent of, but no longer have. What Andrei described as a personal story is actually a personal story for many people. The armed forces of Ukraine are very strong. They fight we win battles, we don't lose battles, and this is because Ukraine has gone through a lot of reforms, including at the time when Andrei served as the Minister of Infrastructure, and a lot of other people did good reforms that you see now in terms of Ukraine's ability to withstand a much stronger enemy. And that's why people are uplifted, even though the economy indeed got hit badly. This uplifted spirit, although not consistent with economy, is very reassuring. And I recently had a pleasure to talk to people who lead regions which were under occupation in March and are now back under control of Ukraine. People are coming back, businesses are coming back, the government is coming back, people are ready to restart their lives, restart the economy. Of course, the challenge is enormous. Ukraine is a big country. Ukraine is almost size of Texas. Ukraine is bigger than Germany, bigger than Japan, bigger than France, continental France in terms of territory. And the part of Ukraine in the north that was under occupation and is liberated now is roughly equivalent to the size of Netherlands. It's not as urbanized, there are not as many people living there, but still the territory is huge. And this territory requires rebuilding. And what the mayors of those territories say is that Ukraine needs a plan and a set of projects, set of successes that we pilot for the territories that we managed to liberate, and make it a showcase for the nationwide renewal. Now, Ukraine is still under war, and it's very difficult to talk about what happens after the war is over, but everybody is positive about Ukraine's future, about the outcome of the war, about our victory, and this is an amazing feeling. Indeed, two of Ukraine's export sectors are metallurgy and agriculture, and both of them are hit hard. Probably many of you in the audience heard about Mariupol. Mariupol has two large metallurgical plants that were selling metal worldwide, including Southeast Asia. Excuse me. And now the city is virtually gone, razed to the ground, unfortunately. And the second export driver is agriculture, and this is the driver that that Russia knows that we are strong agriculturally, and therefore Russia blocked the Black Sea and Azov Sea ports so that Ukraine cannot export. It's a big challenge. In the previous webinar, we had a discussion about it, and there was some assurance that our partners are looking for solutions, including the use of ports in Romania and use of other means of transportation. But as Minister Pipavarsky said, it's not going to be enough, because the amount of grain that Ukraine produces is very large. The countries that will suffer from agricultural price hikes are around the globe, but particularly severely hit will be countries in the immediate vicinity of Ukraine, including North Africa and Middle East, Africa overall. And what is interesting is that when you see which countries support Ukraine the most in terms of sanctioning Russia, in terms of being outspoken supporters, outspoken leadership, people who condemn the war, those are the countries who are not as exposed to food crisis that is caused by the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And this, some of those countries, if you see how they vote, how they try to be neutral, you realize that it's a question of misalignment and misunderstanding of the impacts of the war on, let's say, Africa, and the position that many African countries have towards the war in terms of condemning, but also in terms of joining sanctions. Andrei talked about fuel, and his example was very relevant because in Ukraine, everybody is waiting in the line to get gas at the gas station. There is no gas station where you wouldn't wait for a couple of hours before you fill the tank, and you will not fill the tank to the rim. You are allowed to get only a few gallons. But this is a much wider problem of infrastructure that is being destroyed purposefully. Civil infrastructure, civilians are suffering enormous consequences of the war. Today, we no longer have a war between troops, but we have a war where there are constant airstrikes on civilian infrastructure. There is barely a night in Ukraine where the public addresses don't tell people somewhere in Ukraine to hide in shelter. So it is tough domestically, and it is, and yet people are very optimistic, which is a dissonance, and it's a good dissonance. And then the second dissonance that I want to put on the table and perhaps have discussion with the participants is that there are countries that support Ukraine more, but they are less exposed to the consequences of the war. And then there are countries that are exposed more to food price hike, and yet they are less eager to be proactive in terms of condemning the war. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Oleh. That was a great kind of big picture perspective that you gave us. So Nuru mentioned that he'll be here in 5 minutes, but perhaps I can turn it over to Professor Drezner for some reactions and perhaps some thoughts on how Western sanctions are affecting Russia's economy and the global economy broadly.
Sure. Thanks, Arik. I'd be happy to. I would also add that later on we'll be taking, hopefully when we will be taking questions from participants. Arik, they should put the questions in the chat, yes?
Yeah, so you can type your question in the chat, or if you would like to say your question, you can just raise your Zoom hand.
I mean, a couple questions I have based on, well, I guess I would say one thing, which is obviously it's unsurprising that, you know, Oleh and Andrei are focusing on the effects on the Ukrainian economy. And particularly I'm intrigued by Oleh's point about the dissonance between the state of the Ukrainian economy and what I would guess is the state of Ukrainian public opinion, you know, about the future of Ukraine. In some ways, weirdly, it reminds me a little bit of Russia after 2014, because in the year after Russia annexed Crimea and attempted to take parts of the Donbas, even the sanctions that were imposed in 2014, in combination with the decline in oil prices, the Russian economy was objectively worse off the year after it annexed Crimea. There was you know, by any conceivable metric, it was worse off. And yet when you polled Russians and asked them what they thought about the state of the economy, they were more optimistic about the state of the economy than they were a year earlier, even though, again, everything was, you know, by any material metric in a worse off situation. I guess one question I have to Oleh is, it's unsurprising that you know, Ukrainians are optimistic. Obviously, relative, I think it would be safe to say, to pre-war expectations, Ukraine has exceeded those expectations on the battlefield. I think one obvious question to ask is, as the war continues, do you think there is anything that would cause that Ukrainian optimism to start to wilt, or even if it's a status quo, the continuation of the status quo, do you think Ukrainian, you know, attitudes will continue to stay robust?
Definitely. Professor Drezner, as you see, Andrei talks about economy as in referencing to challenges, and yet he pays taxes, despite the government doesn't require to do so. And this is an excellent summary of how many Ukrainians feel. Now, Ukraine is very uplifted by the fact that we feel that we are on the right side of history. We feel that the world is supporting us. And we feel that it's profoundly unfair to dismiss the notion of Ukrainian statehood that effectively Russia was doing in those long articles that Putin wrote allegedly himself and other commentators from Russia were saying. So Ukraine is very happy to prove the contrary and to enjoy the support that we get. However, when the news hit us that India is going to buy Russian oil with 30% discount, a lot of people in Ukraine also acknowledged the news. Well, Ukraine generally gets more news from Europe and from the immediately neighboring countries, or from the US, but this news was in every outlet. And people were wondering how come that India, the country that pioneered fight with colonialism, that pioneered independence of view, decided to be very opportunistic and take this discount, to take this opportunity that effectively bankrolls the war. And if we hear those types of news more often, it will not serve the Ukrainian public opinion well. Now, very similar story is coming from Africa, unfortunately, where it seems that Russia portrays the food prices and food crisis as a consequence of sanctions imposed on Russia rather than the
itself.
war. And it's absurd. And yet that was another piece of news that that Ukraine saw somehow. So those factors are rather adverse. And if the world is not united and doesn't show the principled view towards the sovereignty and the right to for self-determination, it's going to be a tough battle for us. I see that Nuru is already here, so look forward to hearing the energy perspective as well.
Yes. So why don't we turn to Nuru and then we can have a more general discussion.
Sure. So I'm definitely not a Ukraine expert or a oil and gas expert, but happy to share some views, personal views on sort of the ramifications for the energy and power sector coming out of the Ukraine crisis. So first, if you look at what's happening with respect to gas, I think you've all seen a lot on the news with respect to supply of gas into Europe and the European attention to try to divert sources from or dependence from Russia. That has obviously led to a few things. One, gas prices have gone up significantly, and there's a lot more now discussions around securing gas from other parts, so be it the United States, from the Middle East, and also actually, being part of the World Bank Group. It's interesting also that there are discussions around procuring gas from Africa. Places like Mozambique, Senegal, others are being discussed in terms of procuring gas from for Europe. So obviously that all changes the dynamics of the global gas market. There are now quite a bit of attempts to build liquefied natural gas terminals, which are fairly major investments in Europe to get to essentially get gas that's non-Russian, because Russian gas is pipeline gas, and this would be LNG that's transported through ships. So some of the consequences we are seeing, obviously, is that because European demand for gas has gone up, prices have gone up. And that means that the prices, because this is a global commodity, you see prices going up in Asia, and even in the US, where we don't actually rely so much on imported gas. It's all domestic, but even here, gas prices at the pump and for commercial household consumption has significantly gone up, by almost two times. This, when I look at more from a global perspective, this has interesting implications. One is, with Paris Agreement and the whole concerns around energy transition, climate change, one would have hoped that actually there's a lot more focus on trying to displace coal, which is 2 times more carbon intensive than gas, and that you would actually have more gas and more renewables in the energy mix. The opposite is happening right now. First, energy demand has gone up as economic activity has resumed, but that has meant that with gas not being available and very expensive, actually coal-fired power generation has gone up significantly this year, which is was not the intent. There's been a lot of discussion around phasing out coal, and it's critical in terms of climate change. But unfortunately, we are headed in the wrong direction right now in terms of coal-fired generation, really increasing both in Europe, but also other parts of the world, Asia in particular. There's a lot of coal-fired power plants in Asia. And the hope that those would be run less is actually not the case. It's being run more. And you might have heard from India, where there's been a surge in weather conditions in terms of temperature. It's a vicious cycle, right? So temperatures are going up, so you run your ACs even more. That means you have more demand for energy, and which means countries like India, which have a lot of coal plants, they actually are running much more coal. So, from an energy transition perspective, Paris Agreement perspective, this is all pretty concerning. And it also, means what happens in the longer term. Now, the positive side is if gas prices are going up, renewables, solar and wind, which are very cost competitive today, relatively, they become more attractive. And so one can say that, this gives a lot more push towards investors investing in renewables. And you can see that focus both from an energy diversification perspective, but also from a cost perspective, really a bigger focus on renewables across markets. So that's a positive, but in an ideal energy mix world, you would have a lot of renewables, clean energy, and you would have some gas to balance that renewable energy, because renewable energy, solar, wind is intermittent. You don't have solar at night, right? So you would have gas to sort of balance that mix. But unfortunately, the world is kind of going towards more of renewables, but coal, which is not the combination we would want. Of course, this could all change as the situation, the geopolitical situation, if it changes. But definitely, gas right now is quite expensive, and especially for poorer countries. I mean, there is of course the macro impact from high gas prices, but also from the energy security standpoint and energy mix standpoint. Does it mean that poorer countries where demand is going up, are they going to be now thinking more coal? And that's not going to help. So those are a few things I wanted to mention. With gas prices going up, the other aspect that's quite interesting, and there's a lot of focus in Europe, especially right now, is on green hydrogen, which is a very interesting innovation in the energy space. And the challenge with green hydrogen, where essentially you're using renewables to produce green hydrogen or green ammonia that can be used as a fuel, be it in transport or in industrial facilities. The costs are quite high compared to other types of hydrogen, which is namely made out of gas. So with gas prices really going up, the comparative advantage of attractiveness of green hydrogen has gone up significantly. So, that's also an interesting development that's happening. Will that change the world in terms of energy mix, in the next couple of years? Probably not, but in terms of the trajectory on how the energy mix of the world would change, there might be good hope that green hydrogen can take a sizable place. So let me sort of, these are sort of, big picture thoughts, but I thought I would lay that out again. This is not specific to Ukraine, but just overall in terms of impact on energy markets globally. Thank you.
Nuru, thank you. Nuru, thank you very much. I want to have a sort of quick follow-up to you, and then I want to ask Andrei a question, and then maybe one more question, and then we'll bring in anyone else. My question to you is a simple one, which is, I was sort of expecting perhaps countries to rethink their desire to eliminate nuclear power as a result of what's happened during the war in Ukraine, not to mention the fact that whether you can talk about nuclear being efficient or not, it is certainly more environmentally friendly, assuming that it's properly run, obviously, than coal. And yet, correct me if I'm wrong, I have seen no shift whatsoever in countries like Germany or Japan in terms of rethinking the nuclear question. And I guess my question is why?
Yeah, so there's the traditional nuclear and there's sort of modern nuclear technologies that are being developed, right? I think in terms of the traditional nuclear, yes, there doesn't seem to be a strong interest in Japan or Germany and other places to ramp it up, or or even actually, for Germany, for example,
Not to phase it out.
yeah, I mean, they were planning to phase it out, and they're still staying with that plan, right? I mean, and I agree with you in terms of energy security. From the energy being green, one can say that nuclear energy is quite green, and especially in today's context of gas not being available, makes a lot of sense. So it's also interesting for me in places like Germany why they would not shift gears, at least for now, as an interim solution. It seems to me, I guess, I mean, at least I'm again not close to the German market, but it's more politics sort of driving this, and I guess concerns from those elected that their constituencies might not support their own decisions to not phase out nuclear. But what's interesting actually on the nuclear side is there are sort of new innovative technologies. They call it small modular reactors. I'm definitely not a nuclear scientist, so I can't explain the technology to you, but it's something that seems to be, it's still early stage, but these are from an environmental risk perspective and from the level of investments required, pretty manageable compared to sort of the traditional nuclear technology. So there's quite a bit of actually investments and interest in that field, which may be more politically palatable if that technology comes into commercial operation, and which will most likely will. Folks from MIT to Bill Gates to others are actually putting money into this kind of initiatives, which is quite interesting.
Thank you very much. Andrei, a question for you, which is that, as you said, and of course this is sad, obviously, but I don't doubt the idea that economic production in basically the South and in the East has essentially shut down due to the war itself. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what's going on in the North and the West, though, because I would have imagined that you would have had a dramatic drop off, at least in the first month of the war, as obviously there were Russian forces in the North, and then you had people fleeing into the West. I guess since Russian forces have retreated from both Kiev and to a lesser extent Kharkiv, to what extent are you seeing a revival of economic activity, or is that limited just by the fact that, as a national economy, Ukraine still isn't whole?
Regarding the North still has sustained such damage physical in damage to structures and to people, that it's difficult for me to say when the North will recover. Chernihiv, the city of Chernihiv, has pretty much been destroyed completely. For instance, I mean, we lost all of our selling units there, and the closest petrol station to the city is around 35-40 kilometers from the city, and that it belongs to us. And if you look at the North, mostly Chernihiv Oblast, some Zhytomyr Oblast, and some parts of Sumy and Rivne to the west, we see some agricultural activity, and that's it. And there is a lot of reconstruction going on. A lot of people have left the North and the occupied territories. Unfortunately, because we managed to liberate the North quicker than some other territories, we uncover a lot of we uncover the cruelty of the Russians. And unfortunately, we keep finding every day mass graves of people executed. So it's a little difficult to speak about that. So, but the North, we see mostly agricultural activity and some reconstruction going on. In terms of the West and the North, I mean the Sumy region, the Chernihiv region, some parts of Zhytomyr region, and Rivne. When we look to the left, to the west, then you will see that there's a lot of economic activity going on from the north of the west, from Volyn to the center Lviv and to the very southern part of Western Ukraine, Mukachevo, Uzhgorod, Ivano-Frankivsk, etc. A lot of human capital has left for Western Ukraine, and we see a revival of certain production facilities that have been moved from the rest of Ukraine to the west. If you come to Lviv, you will find it's a lively city. You will find a lot of IT people and a lot of different professionals. The banking system pretty much moved to Lviv. The management of the banking system, private, and people from the National Bank are pretty much all there. Despite the fact that Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk and Ternopil and other cities are being bombed, the Russians are mostly targeting infrastructure points and to, first of all, break down our logistic system that supplies the country with fuel and weapons at this point. But unfortunately, they hit a lot of civilian points. Unfortunately, we lose people even in the West on a daily basis, but lives go on, economic activity goes on in the West, and we even see some limited investments in certain infrastructural projects for transshipment of grain, for transshipment of fuel, metal, iron ore, etc., etc. So when you go to the west of Ukraine, you will not think that there is a war going on in the country, despite the fact that you may have sirens several times a day, and especially at night, because the Russians use the freaking tactic of bombing civilians at night, so people don't sleep, and yeah, it's somewhat cruel, but you get used to it eventually. So the West is economically alive, the North is not. And Kiev, if you go the center of Ukraine, if you go to Kiev, it's I call it a shadow city now. Yeah, on the one hand, a lot of people have returned to Kiev. On the other hand, a lot of businesses are still closed, haven't revived yet. Yeah, but the government agencies are functioning, and the diplomatic institutions are functioning, etc. But it's still, at this point, Kiev is just a shadow of what it used to be prior to the war. Yeah.
So this is a question for anyone. There's a fascinating article in the Washington Post today about the sort of long-term effect of sanctions on Russia, actually. And one of the things that's becoming very clear is that while it is true that Russia is still able to export energy to Europe and is, getting billions of dollars as a result, the response by Western multinationals to pull out of Russia is essentially leading to a re-Sovietization of the Russian economy, where a lot of their production facilities, because they have relied on Western components, are no longer being able to function. So you're going to see Russian aircraft and Russian airplanes increasingly have to be grounded, or they're cannibalizing planes on the ground to be able to have them fly. They've got to cannibalize civilian consumer electronics to even be able to maintain production lines in terms of defense and weapons and so forth. And so, I think yesterday I read that they're reviving the Moskvich as a car because they can't make anything else in Russia. So my question is, while this is obviously about Russia, because of the sort of bottlenecks in terms of the supply chain in Ukraine, to what extent is there a danger that Ukraine is going to face the same fate, which is they won't be able to produce anything that relies on foreign imports?
Well, if you guys don't mind, I will start.
Please, yeah.
There's one, we need to take one step back. When we thought of Russia as a capitalist state. We thought about Moscow, St. Petersburg, and some great pictures, and like propaganda stuff, and some phenomenal production facilities that were owned by multinationals. When you look at the Russian society, it is Soviet. It has been Soviet for the last 30 years. It never changed, except for a limited number of people in power, a limited number of businessmen who made a lot of money and who lived in London and elsewhere. When you look, and I worked in Russia for a number of years, right after Fletcher, my dream job was at the IFC. So I got a job at the IFC. I worked for the IFC for 3 years in Russia, and I traveled extensively. And even after that, I traveled there extensively. The Russian society in general never changed post-Soviet Union. An average Russian couldn't afford to buy a Renault produced in Russia, no matter what, and still remember the Moskvich, or still have the Moskvich that he or her or his mother bought during the Soviet times. So for the Russian society, the picture just doesn't change. It hasn't changed for 30 years. So when you tell an average Russian person that there will be the international sanctions, the average person will say, so what?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an iPhone. I can't afford it. I cannot afford to buy a car. I may be able to afford to buy an apartment and get a mortgage. And potentially in 100 years, my grandchildren will pay it off. So the level of income distribution was so uneven, it was impossible to average it out, because most of the Russians, except for Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe some parts of Vladivostok, live in poverty. They don't have gas. They don't know what good roads are. A lot of the Russian soldiers who occupied northern Ukraine were shocked to see roads in villages. They never thought that those exist. You see? So when we think of the Russian economy and society, they're different things.
Mm-hmm.
For Ukraine, what is different for Ukraine? Because even though some people may say that we used to be the most corrupt country on the planet, or we are economically undeveloped and Russia is better developed, yada, yada, yada. When you look at the livelihood of the average Ukrainian actually has a car, an old one, a used one from Europe, but owns a car and knows what asphalt is and has a washing machine in the house and most likely has plastic windows, insulation in the house that the average Russian just cannot think of. You see, for Ukrainians, even though we may have a temporary loss of import and temporary loss of certain production facilities, we will rebuild very quickly. We'll regroup very quickly post-war because we have a chance to be creative in a democratic society, to make money, to find ways to make a good living. While in Russia, if you live in Kazan, in a certain building, you will most likely live there forever, and you will not have a chance to buy a car because you will just not be able to get there to that level when you can afford a car or something like that. So from the Ukrainian perspective, a temporary loss of access to imports is just temporary. And in 2014, we lost quite a bit, but we managed to recover quite quickly. And since 2014 until February 24th, we pretty much doubled our GDP. We doubled our GDP income per capita. And we almost reached the Russian level, 14, 22. So we know how to recover. This is not our first crisis. So for us, to answer your question, the loss of access to imports will be limited, temporary, and will be just a matter of time when we recover.
Thank you. I want to ask one last question, and then I do want to go to everyone else to ask them for questions. But I want to pick up on something that Oleh mentioned, which was the sort of cognitive dissonance between Ukraine's trading partners versus what their position has been in terms of foreign policy about the war between Russia and Ukraine. And that in particular, countries that have relied heavily on Ukrainian imports, which include, you know, the Middle East, North Africa, the Sub-Saharan Africa, even China for that matter, which was a large trading partner with Ukraine, in response to the war, have nonetheless, if not exactly sided with Russia, have taken a decidedly neutral position and or basically wanting the war to end as soon as possible, which isn't surprising because they want their trade restored. I guess my question is whether there will be a sort of geopolitical scar after the war. Assume the war ends at some point, sometime soon, and Ukraine will be able to revive its economy. Do you think that there will be a geopolitical effect of Ukrainians being unwilling or more reluctant to export to countries that wound up being somewhat more neutral or somewhat more friendly to Russia's position during the war?
My take on it is that right now this hypothesis may not be as valid because Ukrainians feel that the world supports them. Even those countries that vote neutral or don't vote in the UN, there are still voices there that say that the war is terrible. But the longer the war takes place, and the more there are instances where Russia is able to do business with other countries and then uses the proceeds from this business to fund the war, the more it will have a scar, indeed.
Thank you, and I apologize. Mimi objected vociferously, my dog, to what your point was. But you know, she's always been skeptical of the geopolitical role of trade. So that's a long-standing position of my dog. However, at this point, I'm happy to take questions from the rest of the audience. If you have a question, either you can put it in the chat if you want me to raise it, or raise your hand and I will be happy to call on you. My one request is that if you do have a question and I call on you, please turn on your camera if at all possible. Arik, okay.
Well, if nobody has questions, I will be happy to ask a question for now. I've heard a lot about the West wanting to impose an oil embargo on Russia or to impose a price cap on Russian oil. This is a question for Nuru. What effect might that have on global energy markets?
Yeah, look, don't have a crystal ball on it, but certainly I think, any major embargo will have fairly major implications given Russia's role in the market. I guess the question is really around how effective these embargoes are, right? And often they're not as effective. And so I'm not, there's discussions, but I'm not sure it's going to be, Western countries are going to follow through on this. Yeah, hard for me to say, but if it does happen, it will likely have major implications. I mean, just look at what's happening with gas, right? It's already having quite a large impact.
Sorry. We have a question from Reed Gustafson. So he asked, Central and Eastern Europe, and I think this question is mostly from Andrei. Central and Eastern Europe has started to become a hub for technological development and outsourcing, particularly in software. Do you think that the war in Ukraine will cause, or do you think the war will cause Ukraine to lose ground to its neighbors in the battle to become a technology leader within the region?
Unfortunately, yes. Yes, unfortunately, a lot of software engineers are moving to the Baltic states, to Poland, Germany, Israel. For the time being, it's temporary. There is no transfer of headquarters yet. There is a transfer of human resources. If people want to work outside the country, they can do that. We don't see a significant outflow of headquarters. When we start seeing an exit of headquarters, then we will have a problem. But the longer the war continues, the more difficult it will be for some IT outsourcers to come back to the country, because they may settle somewhere. They may get certain interesting economic options in even Spain, Germany, like extremely developed Western European countries are making economic incentives for such people to stay. So the longer the war continues, the more persistent the negative effect will be. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So a question from Tom H. in Kharkiv. Do you think when the war concludes that Ukraine will be able to use foreign aid from the United States and the European Union to get its economy back on track faster? And will aid that has already been pledged so far have a decided impact?
I can take
Please.
This one and share my opinion. If you look at the Marshall Plan that was offered by the United States to Europe, it had a major component of infrastructure rebuilding, and then a much smaller component that supported critical supplies such as food, to avoid hunger and to avoid general social disaster. And it's probably not unreasonable to think that something along those lines will take place in Ukraine at one point if the outcome is of this war is that that we will win and the world will prevail, and there will be a lasting arrangement for security. And however, infrastructure is the backbone of the economy, and then businesses come and use the infrastructure, and it's a separate set of questions that needs to be addressed beyond foreign aid. And an important factor will be the ability of Ukraine to attract back the labor, people who left Ukraine temporarily as refugees, and to create new business opportunities or enabling environment for those opportunities. I think the next question is also about about this and corruption related to that, but I'll let perhaps Andrei.
Yeah, I think so. There's two questions remaining in the queue. I want to actually skip and go to the one that Elizabeth Hafner raised, which is to Andrei. Acknowledging that Ukraine does have regrettably a longstanding reputation for corruption. So when this war ends, Ukraine will obviously need significant foreign investment to rebuild. What can Ukraine do now, and what do you think Ukraine will do to address concerns about corruption, to address corruption itself, to build confidence from Western investors?
Well, first of all, this notion of Ukraine being extremely corrupt is it's a part of the Russian old propaganda. That's number one. Number
okay,
two,
wait a minute, hold on. I watched, as someone who watched Servant of the People at one point, this was hardly just a Russian perception. I mean, this is also a Ukrainian perception as well, to be fair.
on the one hand, but we can have a good laugh. Ukrainians are okay talking about internal issues, and we can have a good laugh. But I'm not joking around here. I'm not saying that Ukraine was not corrupt, but that issue was constantly, absolutely constantly mentioned everywhere possible.
Fair, yeah.
As part of the Russian propaganda.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, post this war, Ukraine will be absolutely different from what it was prior to February 24. The civil society will not tolerate. Prior to the war, the civil society was sort of talking about anti-corruption, exposing corrupt individuals, and then the courts would let them go, etc. Post-war, this war, the civil society will potentially use different measures to fight corruption. So someone who wants to steal something in this country when the reconstruction starts, when the money comes, will have to think twice. What happens if he or she is exposed? Will it be enough to run away or not? So the society has changed. The potential corruptors understand that there is a greater chance of not being able to escape or just pay off the court and happily live thereafter in the country. So things have changed. The society has changed. The society will not accept certain things. And the financial means that will be provided will be much more monitored by the foreign observers, let me put it that way. So I do not believe that we will have an issue with applying the resources to a good use. On the other hand, I know for sure that in certain other wars where Americans fought or the Russian fought, and this is a fact, for every installment of equipment or financial resources to those war-affected areas, all providers usually assume a certain amount to be lost in transit. 5%, 10%, 15%, it's always the case. So I would say that Ukraine will stay below normal percentage because the civil society will not tolerate it.
Well, that's certainly encouraging. Another question involves...
Can I also add just very, very quick?
Oh, sure, go ahead, Oleh.
So, you know, a half a year ago or so, I was sitting at my desk in a neighborhood near Washington, D.C., and was reading the same opinions about unobservables of corruption and perception. And then later I came and joined the army in Ukraine, and I realized that business processes in the army on my level, which is not a strategic level, it's a very operational level, the business processes resemble very much the business processes that I dealt with at the World Bank.
Is that good or
And
bad?
it is good. It
Okay,
is good
sorry.
because-
No offense. I
because-
dealt with the World Bank on occasion.
I-
It was a justifiable joke.
So you wouldn't want to accuse the World Bank of corruption, right?
Yes.
So, but it was a revelation to me. I kid you not, it was a revelation. I didn't know that that it functions the same way as a major corporation. That the army in Ukraine functions the same way as a major corporation does, except the responsibility is even bigger because of the risk, because of the all kinds of risks related to security of communication, security of documents. People in the army are here 24/7, and all of those things get taken care of. And this is unobservable. What you see from outside is that Ukraine has an army that can first defend itself and then can win and can liberate large land swaths, as I said before, a land swath that is equivalent to the Netherlands. But this is because corruption in the army has long been gone. And those reforms and steps that Ukraine took to try to get an international army, to try to learn from the NATO, to accept the aid and the technical assistance, they have not been wasted. They have not been stolen. A lot of commentators are puzzled talking about Ukraine and talking about Afghanistan. But if you come here and serve as an officer, as a captain rank officer, you will see that it's not puzzling at all. And what I hear from Andrei is that those processes have taken place, but because corruption is unobservable, and we never hear corruption, by the way, we hear corruption perception. Corruption perception is a postmodern term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Daniel, if you don't mind, I will make one more.
Sure,
comment.
please.
About a month ago, we were requested by a friendly country to provide logistic services to supply fuel to very important infrastructural points in the country to make sure that nothing technological happens to those units, because had something happened, then the whole world would have been screwed. And when we provided our offer to that to the person representing this country for how much we can provide the product and what the product would cost, they asked us a couple of times if we provided the correct figure, essentially. And we said, yes, we did. And we finished the project all fine. We provided the product even to the territories that are to the points that are very close to the occupied territories. So we made it. And then I wanted to know why they were asking this question. And apparently for similar exercises in other war-affected countries, they would have paid 5, 6, 8 times more for the same thing. And they were they at first thought that maybe we were not serious, but the reason why they paid so much more in other countries is because of the interests of certain individuals who wanted to benefit from such operations, and we pretty much provided the service at cost, because had we not, we were the only potential provider of the service of such scale. Had we not, we could have technological issues of global scale resulting from this war and from the situation. And I'm sure they will come back with more requests after that, but the difference of 5, 6, whatever, X is significant. And unfortunately, I cannot disclose the details, but we pretty much did it at cost.
Thank you. And by the way, just to reinforce a point that Oleh made, which I think is an interesting one, the idea that essentially, I mean, there has been a fair amount written in the West about how Ukraine has clearly benefited from its cooperation with NATO in terms of the Ukrainian military functioning much more like a Western army than I think anyone would have expected. It is striking to compare and contrast that with reports on the Russian army's performance, where there is legitimate puzzlement about where all that money went in terms of ostensibly Russian modernization. And clearly what's coming out is that there was much more corruption in terms of the Russian military than there was in the Ukrainian military. It's an interesting conception, by the way, to think that because of the reduced corruption in the Ukrainian military, that will also hopefully be another way in which it spills over into the rest of Ukrainian society, as well as civil society not tolerating it. You know, everyone who served in the military is not going to tolerate it either, because they're now used to a different way of dealing with things. I want to follow up one last question for Andrei. You referenced dealing with another country in the region. The question is, which countries in the region will be most critical to supporting the economic recovery of Ukraine? And is there a realistic possibility of an arrangement that would create formal bonds to help defend against Russian aggression in the future? Now, I assume this does not include, beyond, I assume, membership in either NATO or the EU.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. You need to understand that this war is not about Ukraine. If we fall, they will not stop. It will be Moldova, and then the Baltic states, and potentially Poland next. So it's not just about Ukraine. And a lot of countries, a lot of our neighbors are now trying to help in order not to be next. That's number one. And secondly, they are creating economic bonds to support us and support themselves, in a sense. So I don't think that any neighbor will try to benefit from our situation. Yes, they may steal some IT engineers but not because they're offering some economic incentives, but because some IT people just want to leave. They don't want to live in a war-affected country, and they are very mobile. So I doubt our neighbors will try to benefit from this war economically. Yes, they will try to create bonds with us because our army is quite strong and experienced. And if something happened in the Baltic states, I wouldn't be surprised if we need to protect the Baltic states. Our specialists may need to protect the rest of Eastern Europe. That's it.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, Arik.
I may just follow up on something Andrei said. I mean, we've been seeing so many people displaced by this conflict. Are you worried about potential brain drain, not only when it comes to technology, but also Ukrainian academia, a variety of other fields? I mean, are there worries that people may not come back to Ukraine after the war?
Yes, there are such worries, and we also already see the brain drain. We have worries, but after every war, there's a revival. And I will give you one example. After the Second World War and during the Soviet times, a lot of Jews have left Ukraine. And but in the last 30 years, we witnessed a revival of a return of Jews to the country, ultra-Orthodox civilians, etc. And we're talking about different, like Odessa, different regions, Uman, etc. So on the one hand, yes, we see a brain drain. It is happening. It will increase the longer the war continues. But on the other hand, people will come back. There will be a revival if we have independent Ukraine. They will not come back to a part of Russia.
I'm trying to think if I have any other questions. I don't think I do. But I very much want to thank Oleh, Andrei, and Nuru for your interventions, and I've learned a lot about what's happened to the Ukrainian economy. I think what I'll do is I'll give each of you, if you want, like 1 or 2 minutes to say any closing remarks. So Oleh, I'll start with you.
I would like to thank everybody. I enjoyed this conversation. I'm also very optimistic about Ukraine, and indeed, it will be tough before it will become much better. But the very fact that we are uplifted, that we ascertained our right for statehood, somebody much stronger tried to bully us, to dismiss us, and we prevailed, is a motivating factor for us. And therefore, I'm of the same opinion as Andrei is, that Ukraine will have a transition that will lead to prosperity in terms of economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrei?
Yeah, I will have very short remarks. I need you to understand, once again, this is not about Ukraine. The global community is fighting a revival of fascism. This is, to the Russians, this war about destroying a sovereign nation and not providing a nation a chance to exist. We've seen it before. We've been through that. And we cannot allow for this to happen again. The slogan of never again becomes extremely practical now. It's not just about going to the streets and waving a flag and saying never again. No, this is it. And if you had a chance to go to northern Ukraine and to see what the Russians did to Ukrainians, you'd be shocked. What they did to kids, to women, to men, and how they executed people with the level of cruelty that as a historian, my first degree is in history, I couldn't imagine. So to you, academia, and to the global business community and to the global leaders, I'm sending a message that if we fall, the situation will touch every single one of you after we fall. But we'll try not to fall, we'll do our best, and we'll keep dying, unfortunately, so you guys can live happily in your homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Nuru, any last words?
Thank you, Daniel. Really, for me, this was more of a learning opportunity, a lot more than I think I was sharing. So thank you, Andrei, Oleh, and yourself. Quite a lot here to digest. Really, I mean, what can I say? You know, from sitting here in DC, like so many other people, just been super impressed by the unity and the purpose and the sophistication that we have seen from the Ukrainian government, from the people, in terms of trying to manage this crisis. You know, despite all the challenges, and very much here, Andrei, in terms of how this is not just about Ukraine. This is much bigger. There are a lot more ramifications. and hopefully this does not drag on for too long. I think in terms of rebuilding Ukraine, there's a lot of interest and support from rest of the world, and from a purely economic standpoint, when I look at some of the countries that are war torn, in fact, you can get really strong GDP growth from, of course, there's a lot of destruction beforehand, but you can actually get into a trajectory of really strong growth post-war, right? I mean, we can talk about Europe as a whole, Japan, and all of that, but that gives also a lot of hope that you can actually rebuild and reconstruct, and in a way, in a different way, also, right? So I think there's a lot of potential, and I think the world is here to support, and hopefully this all gets sorted out sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Oleh, to Andrei, to Nuru. Thank you to Arik for organizing this into the Fletcher Russia and Eurasia Program. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope we all get to see each other again under much better circumstances for Ukraine. But thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye.